for Thursday, June 11th, 2020. We're diving in here. Missoula County would like to acknowledge that this event takes place in the Aboriginal territories of the Salish and Kalispel people. With that, would you join me in the pledge? Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any public announcements out there?
Josh, is this where we do the Juneteenth?
You know, yes, this is where we do Juneteenth. Thank you. So would one of you guys like to read that proclamation? And then I'd like to riff a little bit afterwards.
Sure. Juanita, do you have it handy?
I believe so.
Right, I do too. I can.
And I would also like to invite you guys to riff at your will as well.
If you have it right now on.
I'm good to go.
Okay.
I can read it.
Read away.
Okay, this is a proclamation of Missoula County in the city of Missoula. Whereas news of the end of slavery did not reach frontier areas of the United States, and in particular the southwestern states, for more than 2 years after President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation of January 1st, 1863, and months after the conclusion of the Civil War. And whereas on June 19, 1865, Union soldiers led by Major General Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston, Texas, with news that the Civil War had ended and that the enslaved were free. And whereas African Americans who had been slaves in the Southwest celebrated June 19th, commonly known as Juneteenth Independence Day, as the anniversary of their emancipation. And whereas African Americans from the Southwest continue the tradition of Juneteenth Independence Day as inspiration and encouragement for future generations, and whereas for more than 150 years, Juneteenth Independence Day celebrations have been held to honor African American freedom while encouraging self-development and respect for all cultures. And whereas, although Juneteenth Independence Day is beginning to be recognized as a national and even global event, the history behind the celebration should not be forgotten. And whereas the faith and strength of character demonstrated by former slaves remains an example for all people of the United States, regardless of background, religion, or race. And whereas the character demonstrated by former slaves should inspire us in this country to give thanks for the freedom won by so many people in all nations, and to strive for the goals of bringing freedom and democracy to people of other countries, no matter what their race or religion. Therefore, be it resolved, Missoula County and the city of Missoula do hereby proclaim the 19th of June as Juneteenth Independence Day, to commemorate African American emancipation from slavery, to celebrate the freedom won by people in many countries, and to rededicate ourselves to the cause of liberty. Dated this day, 11th of June, 2020.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for reading that, Dave, and I really appreciate that the city and county can acknowledge Juneteenth. In any year, we should be doing that, and in this year, even more so, as these issues are so prominent in our national and now international consciousness. And I just want to acknowledge that though Juneteenth was a great moment in American history, in that abolition and slaves were freed, in the immediate aftermath, things were not all made right. 40 acres and a mule didn't happen. African Americans were arrested for no crimes at all, and mass incarceration began as a procedural and systemic tool to keep people laboring and following on the horrors of Reconstruction. We saw Jim Crow and redlining and segregation of all types, and right on up through the present. And though the genocide and slavery that made much of the United States have long since ceased, we live with the repercussions of these things, and everyone alive right now was not involved in those. No one alive right now is involved in those crimes, yet we all are on the receiving end of them. Either we benefit or we feel their lash still to this day. And I believe that's what's meant when we say institutional racism. And I'm glad we're in this moment we are right now, and we can acknowledge how we got here as a first step, and we need to begin undoing these things if we are going to have a country that meets the wonderful and beautiful ideals we put forth in the Constitution. That's what I got.
Well
And
said.
I just add that I feel impact is more powerful than intention. And so I really hope we have some impact going forward. And it's not just enough to want to make a change, but how does it land and how does it resonate, I think is our challenge.
Yeah, and to some degree, it's certainly on us.
Absolutely.
And I would say that we come to this with a spirit of humility, that we do not have all of the answers, and would be presumptuous to think that we did, but we recognize that we are the beneficiaries of the history that has gone on before us, as Commissioner Slotnick has so eloquently laid out.
Okay, do we have any public comment on items not on the agenda? You're welcome to speak to what we just spoke to or anything else. Anybody out there is welcome to say something. All right, our next item is, I keep looking at my phone because that's where this agenda is, to announce our current claims list. Claims received as of May 27th, 2020 to June 3rd, 2020 by the Commissioner's Office total $1,216,938.75. And if you're interested in how that money was spent, you can find it on our website. We have two hearings today. The first hearing concerns a franchise agreement with Charter Communications, and our very own Chris Lounsbury will present.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to present on this. So back in 2018, in July of 2018, Missoula County entered into negotiations with Charter Spectrum Communications here in Missoula to enter into a cable franchise agreement. The City of Missoula's cable franchise agreement in that same month and year came due for their 10-year renewal, so it was an opportune time for Missoula County to partner with the city in that process. And what is coming before you today is the completed agreement. This is a short duration agreement. Normally, cable franchises run about 10 years. This is a 3-year agreement while the city continues their negotiations, because theirs is a renewal and ours is a first agreement. Theirs is a slightly longer process to accomplish than ours. So this cable franchise agreement does a couple of different things. First of all, the basis for a cable franchise agreement comes from the Federal Communications section of the federal government. It has to do with the use of cable televisions, placing of wiring and other things into the public right-of-way. And so the idea behind cable franchise is to offset those costs to local government for the use of that public right-of-way that they'll be using. So Spectrum Charter provides its service primarily in the urban core of the city, but it does provide service in some of the urban fringe that is still in the county. And so the cable franchise we're talking about will only be for those areas outside the city limits that are served by Charter Spectrum Communications here in Missoula. And the cable franchise fees are set pretty much in state law, or in federal law. The franchise fee itself is 5% of just the cable television portion of the cable bill. So if they have additional services, it does not impact the cost of those services. In addition to that, it allows for a small fee called a PEG fee, which is Public Education and Government Access. So that's MCAT in Missoula. And it ensures that the MCAT programming will be available to those folks outside of the, sorry for the loud motorcycle noise in the background. The makes sure that MCAT services are available in the urban fringe, and also helps to ensure that MCAT is able to record and broadcast meetings that are of interest to citizens living outside the city limits related to county government. So those two fees are the fees that will go in place. The cable franchise fee is a 5%, as I mentioned. The PEG access fee is 31 cents per subscriber per month. So it's a very small fee. And this agreement is for 3 years while the city completes theirs. And then at that time, we'll bring a longer term franchise agreement before the commissioners.
This is long overdue, isn't it?
We're about 10 years behind, yes, in doing this, as Spectrum has been providing service out in that area for a number of years.
How long has the city been doing it?
The city's agreement came up for renewal in 2018, and that was their 10-year mark, so it will have been 12 years that they've had the current franchise agreement. I don't know if they had one prior to that.
Oh, okay.
Chris, how much money will this generate, you think?
So we have a rough estimate that it'll generate approximately $80,000 a year for the county.
That's
that use of right of way.
That's really great. And would that be unrestricted money?
It is largely unrestricted. We do provide funding to MCAT in addition to the 31 cents for some of their equipment and things like that. So a portion of this money might be used for that, but it will be obviously the commissioner's decision as part of your budgeting process.
Great, thanks.
Is there anyone from MCAT on the line here, Chris?
I do not believe they were able to join us today. I don't recognize any of the names. Let me put it that way, as being folks from MCAT, but there are a couple of phone numbers that I don't know.
I think it was like my second or third day in office. Joel from MCAT got a hold of me and wanted to talk to me about this, and it was so overwhelmingly complicated and it took forever to unpack, given that I had no experience in it. I thought, man, this is really going to be a hard job. I'm glad a year and a half later, we're nailing this down.
Yeah.
I hope Joel's out there smiling somewhere.
Hey guys, MCAT's on the line.
Oh, I can see.
Oh,
Yeah,
I see.
I know that's the recording and broadcasting piece. I don't know if they can interact.
They can't, but they're there. They're like the wizard.
Ah.
Well, we really appreciate the services we get from MCAT and acknowledge the wonderful bargain that they provide the citizens of Missoula County by getting this service out to all.
And I should point out one other thing. I apologize, commissioners. As part of the cable franchise, it requires that Spectrum Charter comply with the county public works manual and regulations around right-of-way use. So they already do that, but that is part of the agreement as well, is that they'll continue to do that and follow the public works manual related to right-of-way use.
Great. Okay.
And so if the commission's in favor of that, then I think you have the resolution with you.
Yes.
Is there any public comment, I wonder?
There's something in the chat. What is?
Oh, I can't even see it.
I've lost my mouse. My mouse is not working, so I can't open it.
I'm not seeing anything other than questions about how the audio recording is going for the meeting.
Okay. And I've lost my mouse, so I don't have the language for the.
Well, if nobody has anything to add, I would just say that likewise, this is in the category of better late than never.
Yeah.
I think this will be a good thing for Missoula County, and I look forward to opportunities to enhance our public outreach through MCAT also. So I would move that we adopt the franchise agreement with Charter Communications.
Second.
Right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, commissioners.
Thank you.
Okay, our next hearing is on the Smurfit Stone boundary line relocation. With Matt Heimel will present.
Good afternoon, commissioners. It's Matt Heimel with Missoula County CAPS. This is a continuation for the hearing for the Smurfit boundary line relocation. The first public hearing on this item was on May 28th, 2020, and this boundary line relocation was brought to the governing body as we found it was in the public interest to open a public hearing. So for a brief summary of the proposal, I'll make sure my PowerPoint is shared. I'll touch back on just showing the proposed tracks, but if anyone needs to run through it again, we can also look at more more details. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Absolutely.
Okay, so this is a overlay that I showed on the 28th. The red lines show the proposed tract layout, and then I'll switch back to current lot configuration. And so just in summary, the proposal is to relocate boundaries of 5 tracts to the current configuration as shown here is proposed by the applicant. And as discussed on the 28th of May, staff found that this did not constitute or show an invasion or an attempt to evade subdivision review, and staff was recommending approval of the request. There was a follow-up meeting on a Tuesday, a follow-up public meeting at 11:30 a.m. this past Tuesday, where we discussed the process for a review of evasion criteria. And so today we're at the scheduled continuation of the hearing to take any more comment and continue deliberation on the item. So if needed, I can go back through details of the proposal, or the applicant's representative is also available for any additional questions on the nature of the proposal.
Do you guys have any questions?
I don't have a question for Matt. I do see that Allie Archer from the EPA is on the line this week, and I'd be interested to know if she has any questions or concerns about the proposal before us.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Hey, Allie.
Yeah.
I think that all I'd like to say is that regardless of whether the county decides to move the boundary line, it doesn't impact our Superfund boundary. That's determined by EPA during the remedial investigation process. So we'll determine nature and extent of contamination. And so other than that, I don't think we really have a comment on this proposal. Just more of a reassurance of that it won't impact our Superfund boundary.
Thank you.
Do we have any comment from the developer or the developer's representative?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. This is Kirk Atkins from WGM Group, and I feel we've presented all the salient points for the boundary location. Don't really have anything else to add. Thank you.
Thanks, Kirk. Any public comment?
Josh, can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Okay, my name is Larry Weeks. I sent you some comments regarding a shifting of the boundary of track 1 and track 2. And I feel that that wildlife area on the south end of the property should be retained as riparian buffer and should be included in track 2. And I wonder what your comments are regarding my proposed change of the boundary line.
Would maybe Kirk have something
Yeah,
to?
I was going to say the same thing, Juan.
Hi, this is Kirk Atkins. Go ahead.
Well, I sent you a diagram. You got the diagram, didn't you, Josh?
I did. Do you wanted my opinion or our opinion?
Yeah, right.
So, I mean, my understanding is that the rebuttable presumptions around boundary line relocation don't consider use or geography or topography or ecological characteristics as much as those things are actually near and dear and important to us all. If I understand it right, boundary line relocation have to begin and end with the same amount of tracts, and that's roughly it. There's some stipulations around size as well, if I understand it right, but I think that's it. And we have been in a situation here where it's easy to get sidetracked because of the very hot button nature of this property and the very real ecological qualities and high quality attributes of this specific area. And unfortunately, in a boundary line relocation, that's not what we should be considering. When use is under consideration, whether that's for the building of houses or other industrial activities, those uses have to go through permitting. And at that point, all the characteristics of the property that I'm speaking to would be under consideration. But for a boundary line consideration, it's unfortunately not a salient part of the discussion.
Well,
I don't disagree with you on the quality of the area.
And just to add on to that, and maybe we could hear from Kirk also, because we did discuss this at our last meeting briefly, and it sounds as if, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kirk, there was some desire to retain access to the river from Tract 1, which if the proposal from the gentleman who just spoke was what the boundary line looked like, there would be no access from Tract 1 to the river. Is that correct? Kirk?
Yes. Hi, this is Kirk from WGM Group again. The owners of the land did contemplate what Mr. Weeks brought up about the deep well, and they did want to put it on Tract 1 to make it part of the lands that PA Prospect would own. And they also decided to put the boundary along that kind of that slough or that low area. So Tract 1 and that PA Prospect did have access to the river. But through the discussions I've had, there was no discussion or inference of any way they're going to use that. They're just set it up that way. And that's the way they decided to lay out the boundaries.
Okay. I don't understand why Track 1 would need access to the river, but anyway, apparently somebody else did. You know, I'm concerned about the property owner selling Track 1 and then losing control of what happens there. But apparently if they propose any kind of development on that, it has to go through a permitting process. And then I would get my opportunity to give input at that time. Is that correct?
That's my understanding.
Okay. All right.
And maybe, Josh, I wonder if our planning staff would, either Matt or anyone else on the line from CAPS would like to weigh in. I don't know, while there certainly is a process, permitting process for any specific development proposal that would come through, I'm not clear on what the public involvement process would be for that. Matt, is that something you could clarify?
Yes. So if it's a building permit for simply a new building on an unzoned tract, there wouldn't be a governing body, a public hearing for that particular thing. If they came back for for some application type that would have a public process, for like a re-subdivision, for example, or buildings for lease or rent, those kinds of things, then that will be open to a public hearing. So it will depend on the type of the development project. Something that's just a building permit would not be opened up to a comment period. But the other things I mentioned, like a subdivision, building for lease or rent, or other more substantial projects, would be open to a public process with notification to adjacent or nearby property owners.
Yeah, so just to kind of say it real clearly, if someone bought Tract 1 and they built one house, that's not up for any public discussion. There's a building permitting process and that's it. But if they bought Tract 1 and decided they wanted to cut it in 12 pieces or sell them all off, that would be a subdivision and there would be opportunity for public comment.
Okay. Okay. Well, the area that I'm interested in is in the floodplain, so I don't think there'll be any building going on in that area, that section.
No.
So that may be enough protection, at least for the time being, anyway.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Thanks for calling in. We are aware and sensitive to the quality of this area.
It's the best habitat on the whole mill site, and I'm trying to protect it. You know, I've got half my life has been put into that habitat restoration at the mill site, and I just don't want to see it go to waste.
Yeah, we don't either, for sure.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Weeks.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We have any other public comment? Jerry, do you want to say something?
No, just, you know, I concur with what we pretty much said last week. I know that there's some state law that's going to come into play here that I think we all which was different. So just, you know, I think it's hard to, as we talked about last week, it's really hard to say yay or nay to something based on proposed use that we don't know, and I know that plays into the law, so it's tough. But
you know, there was a lot of talk out there that a gravel pit is proposed for one of these areas, and if I understand it right, the DEQ does that permitting mostly administratively, but it's up to the DEQ whether or not they want to hold a public hearing and really collect input on a gravel pit. And if such a thing does happen, I would ask Dave and Wanda join me in inviting our own Travis Ross to write a letter to the DEQ describing this area in terms of hydrology and toxicology, and encourage them to hold a public hearing and hear what people have to say, because there are a lot of folks who are very invested in this area.
Yeah, it slipped my mind, but it seems like we were going to discuss that maybe under correspondence today in admin, and I totally forgot about that. But I would concur. I think we should, as the Board of County Commissioners, request that even if DEQ does not formally have to consider us as part of one of the adjoining property owners, I think we ought to formally request that a public meeting be held on this proposed gravel pit.
you have till July 10th to do that. The CAG and Clark Fork Coalition and Travis have all been, there's some emails that have been floating around talking about the public comment period on the gravel pit.
So how do we make sure that, is this Emmy, or who's going to put this on our agenda? Because we don't want to miss this again.
Well, or could we just consider, and I would turn to John Hart here, can we just at this moment in time have it on the record that we direct staff to draft a letter for us requesting that DEQ hold a public meeting?
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you. John, yes. Can we do that here now? Can we do that with Travis, or do we need to work through CAPS?
I think it doesn't matter who provides assistance. It's probably helpful to get some assistance from both CAPS and the Water Quality District, and okay. Anybody else with expertise in county government.
Okay. All right. So back to kind of your question, Dave, do we need to formally reach out to Travis and Chet? Would that be the way to go?
I think so. John, what do you think? Just direct them to draft up a letter to DEQ, and we'll just get that on our correspondence in the next week or something in admin.
That sounds appropriate to me.
Okay, let's do that.
Okay, so Emmy's gonna put this on an admin agenda. Emmy,
are you out there?
Yep, I can do that.
Thank you. Yep.
Whenever it's ready.
Now we know it'll actually happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess as far as today's proposal before us, I just want to reiterate to everyone who's listening that regardless of the somewhat narrowly focused question before us as far as whether the boundary line relocation is an evasion of an attempted evasion of the Montana Subdivision and Platting Act, I am absolutely committed to this area being remediated and the floodplain restored. So I think that is the end game that we're looking at.
Yeah, well said. That's the prize that our eyes are on.
Is there other comment? There's like 7 other folks, it looks like, on the line. How about Mary Price? Did you want to say anything?
Yes, thank you very much. I don't really have a lot to add today, other than I was just thinking back over the 10 years that Missoula County and the tribes have worked together on this site. I think we share a lot of the same concerns and values for the use of the site, and I think Commissioner Strohmeyer just very eloquently stated that we're all committed to the long-term remediation and restoration of the site. We certainly understand the decision that you're before you today and the regulatory framework in which you have to make that decision. So I'm still confident that the county tribal relationship remains strong on this site, and we look forward to continuing the discussions. And want to thank you for having this public hearing on this important decision today. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Dave or Juan, do you guys have a motion? Unless there's other comment, we're fully open to as much comment as you want to speak to.
Matt, do you have what the formal motion is?
Yes.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Matt. So I motion that Missoula County Community and Planning Services staff recommends that the request by MLH Montana, PA Prospect, and David Wesley Harris to utilize the relocation of Common Boundaries Exemption MCA 76-3-2071A be approved based on the evasion criteria and rebuttal presumptions reviewed contained in the staff analysis.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great, thanks for everyone's comments and thoughtful consideration to this, and thank you, Matt, for a great presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
With that, do we have any other business? Okay, as the mayor of the city of Missoula is fond of saying, take the afternoon off.